At 0110 on 24 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer lay on his back under a Lancaster at RAF Skellingthorpe in eastern England. He had a grease pencil in his teeth. His left hand steadied a plywood chute bolted inside the open bomb bay. His right hand shoved the first wrapped bundle into the mouth of it, feeling for the catch. Mercer was 26 years old. He had flown 18 operations as a wireless operator and radar hand. He had 0 kills and 3 near misses. Tonight, the target was Hamburg. The force count on the board read 700 plus aircraft. The enemy count was unknown. But everyone knew the night fighters would be waiting. The Lancaster had honest strengths. 4 Merlins could carry 12,000 pounds of bombs in a single lift. It could reach past 500 miles at cruising power. It could take punishment and stay in the stream. It also carried a new advantage in the belly. A ground-looking radar set that could paint coastlines through cloud. But it had one fatal problem. The enemy did not need to see the aircraft with eyes. Germany's radar stations could see it as a moving dot. Their controllers could steer twin-engine fighters into the dark with a stopwatch and a voice. The doctrine came down in clean orders. Never break the stream. Use the prescribed height. Don't glow. Don't talk. Corkscrew on the first warning. Keep formation spacing. Trust the route markers. Mercer had tried that doctrine 18 times. It hadn't worked. In the last 45 days, his station's notice board had gained 41 new empty squares. Each square was a crew photograph pulled down after a telegram arrived. In the first 3 weeks of July alone, his group had lost 12 aircraft on 2 nights that were supposed to be routine. A single Lancaster carried 7 men. 7 men went missing in one flash. And the mess hall still served breakfast at 0630. The verdict after each loss sounded the same. Pilat error. Within spec. Tonight, Mercer was handling something nobody wrote on the main board. The wrapped bundles in his hands looked like cheap stationery. Brown paper. String. A stenciled number in black ink. Inside were thousands of aluminum strips, cut to strict lengths like a machine shop job. Some were about 25 centimeters long. Others were over a meter. Each length matched a German radar band. Half a wavelength. So it would reflect hard and lie. It worked like a physical lie told at scale. Drop the strips in a steady rhythm. Let them drift and tumble in the slipstream. Each strip became a tiny mirror to a radar pulse. Thousands became a cloud. A single cloud became a false formation. A false formation became a controller's nightmare. Mercer had tested one bundle on the ground 2 nights earlier. In a hangar with the doors shut. He had shaken it out over a canvas sheet. The strips had stuck to his sleeves and hair. They clung in the humidity and slid across the floor with a dry hiss. The engineering sergeant watching had muttered, "Tin foil." It was not admiration. It was disbelief. There was a problem. Though, the Lancaster had not been designed to feed paper bundles out of the bomb bay at 200 miles an hour. The official method was simple on paper. Open the chute. Let gravity do the rest. In reality, the slipstream grabbed. The packets snagged. And the first jam could turn a secret weapon into dead weight. Mercer had raised it at 2340 inches, the dispersal hut. Over a mug of tea that tasted of metal, the flight engineer, a tired flying sergeant named Owen, had stared at the chute and shook his head. Within specifications, Owen said, tapping the mounting bracket, "Factory tolerances. If we alter this and it fails, we void warranty. No authorization. None." Mercer told him what the bundles were for without saying the word aloud. He pointed at the paper seam. He mimed a jam. He spoke in numbers because numbers carried weight. 1 jam at 18,000 feet. He said, 1 jam over the coast. The cloud comes out late. We lose the first 10 minutes. Owen's answer was procedural, like a stamped form. If it needs redesign, send it back. He said, Farnborough is 140 miles by road, and the manufacturer is days away, not hours. The orders for the raid were already on the wall. Wheels Up was scheduled before dawn. There would be no factory fix. So Mercer did what crews always did when the paper said no. He made an illegal fix with what was at hand. He took a length of parachute static line from a spares box. He cut 18 inches with a hacksaw. He bent it into a shallow U over a vice jaw until his palms burned. He wrapped the ends with friction tape from the wireless kit. He then seated the U-spring inside the chute mouth so it pressed inward with about 4 pounds of tension, just enough to grip the packet without tearing it. It took 11 minutes. He sliced his knuckle on a burr in the plywood. The cut was small, but it bled onto the first brown wrapper, leaving a dark thumbprint that would dry before takeoff. Nobody noticed, Mercer told himself, because that was part of the ritual. The inspectors came through at 0030. They checked bomb fuses. They checked fuel caps. They checked turret feeds and oxygen bottles. They did not pull at the mouth of a plywood chute. They did not ask why there was a taped wire spring inside it, hidden in the shadow of a bomb bay. On the flight line, engines began to cough and catch. 4 Merlins per aircraft, 12 cylinders each, 48 pistons beating in the dark for one machine. Across the station, the first Lancasters rolled at 0205, tail wheels shuddering over concrete seams, their exhausts pulsing orange in the mist. Mercer climbed into the fuselage and closed the hatch. He carried the maintenance logbook in his jacket, folded against his chest. There was no entry for the wire spring. There was no entry for the foil bundles. There was only a note in pencil, chute fitted. Tested. Free. In the cockpit, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. Clipped and calm. Stand by, he said. Stream forms in 10. Mercer looked back toward the belly of the aircraft where the paper bundles waited. He could already imagine the radar screens on the far shore. The clean green sweep. The neat dots. The controllers, confident in their geometry. He pressed his bandaged knuckle into his palm and listened to the Merlins rise to 2. 600 revolutions per minute for takeoff. What happened in the next 25 minutes would change Europe's night war forever. At 0235 on 24 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer crouched inside the Lancaster's fuselage as the North Sea slid beneath them. The aircraft held 18,000 feet. The airspeed sat near 200 miles an hour. The bomb bay doors were still closed, and the foil bundles waited in the dark like extra ammunition. The stream was forming behind them. Not one aircraft. Dozens. Then hundreds. Navigation lights were masked. Engines were throttled to match the pace. In the wireless compartment, Mercer heard the thin, constant chatter of the set, short bursts, call signs, course checks. No one spoke of fear. The numbers did that job. He opened the maintenance logbook on his knee. He stared at the pencil line he had written. Chute fitted. Tested. Free. He could still feel the wire spring under his fingertips from the ground test. He could still feel the cut on his knuckle, tight under the bandage. The first incident of the month had happened at 0012 on 28 June 1943 over Cologne. A Lancaster from a neighbouring squadron had called fighter below at roughly 19,000 feet. Seconds later, the rear gunner's last words were mushy controls. Then silence. The official line written afterward was blunt. Pilot error. The bomber had failed to take evasive action. The second incident came on 3 July 1943 at 2350 near the Dutch coast. A crewman Mercer knew, Flight Sergeant Dennis Hale, had described a strange lag in the corkscrew, like the aircraft hesitated. Hale had said, hands shaking around a cigarette. Hale did not make it home on his next trip. The report again carried the refrain, within spec, pilot error. The third incident was only 8 nights earlier. 16 July 1943. On a raid to Aachen, a bomber had broken the stream at about 17,500 feet, trying to dodge a coned searchlight. It was hit within 2 minutes. Seen burning as it fell. The commander's note after the loss was almost angry. Never break the stream. Don't glow. Don't talk. Mercer had obeyed. He had still watched men vanish. Now the coast approached. Somewhere ahead, German radar pulses were sweeping out over water. The system was not magic. It was timing and reflection. A transmitter sent a pulse. The pulse hit metal. The echo returned. A controller measured seconds. Seconds became distance. Distance became an interception vector. Then a night fighter climbed into the dark and waited for the last cue. Mercer's job was to break that chain with something small and cheap. At Doi Patruzet. The navigator called. Coast, in 5. The Lancaster's nose dipped a fraction as the pilot trimmed. The altitude held steady. The stream tightened. Mercer could hear the dorsal turret traverse once. Then stop. The gunner was checking movement by feel, not by sight. At Deutschingzetschitray. The pilot spoke again. Bomb bay doors, he said. 2 words, like a switch being thrown. The doors opened with a low, vibrating roar that travelled through the airframe. Cold air poured into the fuselage, bringing the smell of exhaust and oil. Mercer clipped his harness tighter. He crawled to the chute and planted his boots against a frame member. His hands found the first bundle by touch. The foil packets were numbered. He pulled one first. The bundle weighed less than a magazine of ammunition. It felt absurd to treat it like a weapon. He shoved it into the chute mouth. The illegal wire spring bit and held. Then it released. The first packet vanished downward. Mercer heard the faint slap of paper caught by slipstream and ripped away. The strips inside would spill and scatter in a widening trail. He counted by instinct. 1 Mississippi. 2. 3. He fed the next packet. He repeated it. Again. Again. His knuckles stung as the bandage shifted. The cut reopened a little. Blood slicked the wrapper of packet 4. He almost lost his grip. His fingers tightened harder. And the packet went through. That near mistake would not appear in any report. Outside, the foil began to do its work. On the far side of the water, a German radar operator stared at a scope and frowned. The display did not show a neat stream. It showed haze. It showed blooms. It showed a spreading clutter that looked like a formation twice the real width. Some reports would later describe it as a storm. Some would describe it as snow. The operator called it something else. He called it wrong. A trade-off. Mercer fed packet 8. The aircraft crossed the coastline. The navigator marked the turn. The pilot held steady. The stream continued. Thousands of tons of bombs moving through a corridor of darkness, now dragging a trail of bright lies behind it. Minutes later, the first enemy reaction arrived in fragments. A warning came over the intercom from the rear gunner. Searchlights, he said. Off to port. His voice sounded surprised, not relieved. The beams were there, but they were hunting wide. They swung through empty air. They cut across nothing. They held for seconds, then drifted away, as if the hands guiding them could not decide. At Trey Zecher, the night fighter call-outs began. Short, sharp, single aircraft in area, multiple contacts, cannot distinguish. The words were filtered and incomplete, picked up by eavesdropping and later reconstructed. The pattern was clear. The defense picture had become uncertain. Mercer kept feeding the chute. Packet 11, packet 12. He timed it to the airspeed and the feel of the stream. Too fast, and the cloud would thicken and drop behind them. Too slow, and the lie would thin and break. He did it by rhythm, like a man shoveling coal. By Tripietnashtya, he had released 14 packets. That was tens of thousands of strips. That was miles of drifting aluminum. That was a false sky drawn in pieces. Then, over Hamburg, the real sky turned into a furnace. At Trey Dozetchi Trey, the first glow rose from the target area. It was not one fire. It was dozens, then hundreds, merging into a smear of orange that pushed up through haze. The bomber stream began its run. Bomb doors opened and closed in sequence. The aircraft shuddered as loads left. Time over target for one crew might be 90 seconds. For another, 2 minutes. But the city would burn for hours. Mercer heard the flak as a physical thing, not the explosions first, but the ripping sound of fragments striking airframe skin. A sharp, metallic rattle ran along the fuselage like hail on a roof. The aircraft jolted once. The pilot swore softly. The engineer called out a number. Port inner, he said. Boost down 5. Even under fire, Mercer watched the chute. Because the paradox had not ended, the tiny thing could still fail. One jam at the wrong moment could open the radar picture again and invite the fighters back in. At Tre-Doazet chasse. Packet 17 snagged. It stopped halfway. The wire spring held too long. The paper caught. Mercer yanked once. The bundle tore. Aluminum strips erupted into the bomb bay like a shredded curtain. For half a second, he froze, realizing the worst outcome. Foil inside the aircraft. Foil near wiring. Foil near the radar set. He slapped the strips away with his bare hand. The edges cut. A thin line of blood appeared across his palm. He reached into the chute and forced the torn paper through, then swept the remaining strips into the bay opening with 2 hard strokes. The packet cleared. The stream of lies resumed. Nobody noticed. He told himself again, as flak hammered the air outside. At Tre-Doazet. The intercom carried a different tone. The rear gunner sounded almost confused. No fighters, he said. Not close. Then, a pause. They're lost. Mercer did not answer. He kept feeding the chute. Because somewhere, in a concrete room on the German side, someone was staring at a scope and realizing the truth. The defense system had been built on precision, on ranges, on bearings, on factory tolerances, and now a childish bundle of strips was erasing it in real time. At Tre-Doazet. Mercer reached for packet 20, the last of his stack. His fingers were slick with blood and paper dust. The Lancaster held its course away from the target, turning onto the withdrawal leg as the city behind them threw light onto the undersides of cloud. He shoved the final bundle into the chute. He felt the wire spring bite. He felt it release. Then he heard a new sound through the fuselage. Not flak, not engines. A knock at the hatch behind him. 3 sharp taps. The flight engineer's voice followed, tight and immediate. Mercer, Owen said. The squadron engineering officer is coming up the line after landing. He wants the chute inspected. At 0336 on 24 July 1943. Flying Officer Alan Mercer pulled the bomb bay doors shut from his station and wiped his bleeding palm on a rag. The Lancaster was leaving Hamburg behind. The glow of the fires still reached the belly of the cloud layer. The altimeter held near 19,000 feet. The aircraft settled into a long, steady withdrawal. Mercer stared at the maintenance logbook. The pencil line was still there. Chute fitted. Tested. Free. It was now a lie by omission. A wire spring sat inside the chute mouth. Tape held it in place. Blood and foil dust clung to the plywood. If an inspection found it, there would be questions. In theory, there were rules for everything. There were authorization codes. There were forms. There were factory tolerances. In practice, there was only what got men home. The intercom carried a short exchange. The pilot asked for damage. The engineer answered in numbers. Port in a boost down 5. He repeated. Oil pressure steady. The rear gunner reported one near pass by a fighter at 0318 but no firing. The mid-upper gunner reported nothing at all. That silence was its own statistic. Mercer had heard crews talk about quiet nights before. Quiet nights were often the ones that killed you. A quiet night could mean the fighters were above you, or below you, or simply patient. But tonight, the pattern felt different. The searchlights had hunted wide. The radio fragments had sounded uncertain. The defense system had seemed to lose its grip. Records would later suggest the first wave's losses were lower than the week before. Not zero, never zero, but reduced. The numbers were not yet public. The crews could only feel the gap where fear usually sat. The first proof had arrived without fanfare. It arrived in what they did not see. Mercer kept his body close to the wireless table and checked the radar set's cables by touch. He did not want aluminum strips near connectors. He found none. He checked the floor for stray foil. He found 3 thin strips trapped under a rib. He pinched them out and folded them into his rag like contraband. The Lancaster crossed back over the coast at roughly 0410. The North Sea returned. Black and featureless, the engine note became steady again. The kind of sound that tricked men into believing they were safe. That was when the institutional reflex began to form. At Chinch Trays at Chichinch. Wheels touched concrete at RAF Skellingthorpe. The Lancaster rolled. Brakes, squealing, and turned toward dispersal. The crew climbed out in sequence. Stiff and silent, the dawn light made the aircraft look ordinary again. Oil streaks, exhaust stains, small holes in the skin, nothing that looked like a revolution. Mercer stayed in the fuselage. He could hear engines shutting down across the airfield. One after another. He could hear the ground crews shouting. He could hear the thin clink of spent casings being swept from turret trays. He could hear the sound of men counting who had returned. He opened the bomb bay hatch and lowered himself to the ground, then crawled back under the aircraft with a flashlight. His shoulder brushed cold metal. His bandaged knuckle stuck to tape when he leaned too hard. He found the chute mouth inside the bay and saw the wire spring exactly where he had placed it. A voice above him said, "What's that?" It was not Owen. It was a new man. Higher rank. Squadron Engineering Officer. Flight Lieutenant Peter Voss. Fictional name. Real type. He carried a clipboard and the kind of tired authority that came from signing too many aircraft serviceability reports. Mercer slid out enough to look up. "Tutor Stiffener," he said. He kept his tone flat. He kept his words short. Voss leaned in, peering at the taped wire. He did not touch it. He looked at it the way a man looks at a crack in a bridge. "Within specifications," Voss said automatically. Then stopped. He heard himself. He corrected. "Is it within specifications?" Mercer answered with the only shield he had. "Factory tolerances aren't built for this load." He said, "Packets snag at 200 miles an hour. This keeps the feed consistent." Voss's pencil hovered. "No authorization," he said. The words came in the expected order. Like doctrine. If the manufacturer didn't design it, you don't fit it. It could void warranty. Mercer felt the anger rise. Hot and fast. Then flattened it. He kept to numbers. "It adds about 4 pounds of tension," he said. "Takes 11 minutes to fit. It prevented one jam at 0326. I cut my hand clearing it." Voss frowned at the bloodstain on the plywood. He flicked his gaze to Mercer's bandage. He did not apologize. He did not praise. He was deciding where to place this on a form. "Farnborough is 140 miles, Voss said, as if repeating a rule protected him. "The factory knows tolerances." "Hamburg is 500 miles, Mercer answered, "and the fighters live between." The refusal scene did not end with shouting. It ended with paperwork. Voss straightened. "No modifications," he said. "Not unless it's approved. We cannot have crews improvising devices inside bomb bays. It becomes untraceable. It becomes liability." The word liability was not used in 1943 like it is now, but the meaning existed. It meant blame. It meant courts. It meant careers. It meant something other than survival. Mercer nodded as if he accepted it. He did not. Because the raids were not done. Operation Gomorrah had just begun. There would be more nights, more streams, more flak. And now, a tiny thing had offered a way to rob the radar rooms of their certainty. Mercer waited until Voss walked away, his boots clacking over concrete. Then Mercer and Owen worked in silence, shoulder to shoulder under the open bay. They made the fix look legal. They took the static line wire and replaced the bright friction tape with canvas tape matching the chute seams. They shaved the wire ends smoother with a file so it would not snag paper. They painted the wire with a thin coat of dull grey primer borrowed from a touch-up kit. Just enough to kill the shine. Mercer tightened the mounting screws 1/4 turn, then backed them off 1/8, matching the feel of factory slack. 3 tactile micro-actions: cut, file, tape. 1 near mistake. Owen's hand slipped on the file at 0612. The file bit his thumb. It was a small cut. It bled onto the primer. Owen swore. Low. Mercer wiped it clean before it dried, because dried blood looked like evidence. Nobody noticed. Mercer whispered, not as comfort but as instruction. The concealment method mattered. Inspections checked bomb fuses and arming wires. They checked oxygen and hydraulics. They did not measure chute mouth tension with a scale. They did not pull empty paper packets through at speed. They looked for what they had been trained to see. Mercer wrote a second line in the maintenance logbook. Not the truth. A cover that sounded routine. Chute mouth tightened. Vibration reduced. He left out the wire. He left out the tape. He left out the blood. At Chapter Doazechi. A brief came down for the next night. Another Hamburg run. Another heavy count. Another chance to test whether the radar rooms would drown again. The refrain still hovered in the system. Pilot error. Within spec. But now Mercer had proof in his hands. A rag with 3 aluminum strips folded inside it. A logbook with a falsified line. A wire spring hidden in a shadow. And the enemy, somewhere across the sea, had felt the first shock of losing sight. At Opt Chinch. Voss returned with a small Group 1 officer from Group Headquarters and 1 man in civilian clothes with a measuring tape in his pocket. The civilian looked like a factory representative. They stopped under Mercer's Lancaster. The headquarters officer pointed at the bomb bay and spoke 1 sentence that froze the air around it. "Show me exactly how you're dropping this window tonight," he said. At 0805, on 24 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer stayed on his knees under the Lancaster as footsteps gathered around the open bomb bay. The concrete was cold through his coveralls. His bandage was stiff with dried blood. The air smelled of oil, wet grass, and exhaust that had not yet faded. Flight Lieutenant Peter Voss stood closest, clipboard tucked under his arm. Next to him was a Group Headquarters officer in a freshly pressed tunic, a man who looked rested in a place that never slept. Behind them waited a civilian with a tape measure and a small leather case. He had the calm eyes of someone who trusted paperwork more than luck. "Show me exactly how you're dropping this window tonight," the headquarters officer said. Mercer did not answer immediately. He looked at the chute mouth. The wire spring was hidden in dull grey paint and canvas tape. From 2 feet away it looked like a crude reinforcement. From 6 inches away it looked like a modification, the kind that ended careers. Mercer reached for the maintenance logbook, lying open on a wooden box. He tapped the pencil lines he had written. Chute mouth tightened. Vibration reduced. Routine words. Safe words. The headquarters officer did not care about safe words. "Start from the packet," he said. "Time it. Show the feed." Mercer nodded once. He climbed into the bomb bay, shoulders scraping the edges, and pulled 1 wrapped bundle from a crate. The bundle was marked with a black number. He held it up so all 3 men could see it. "This is it," Mercer said. "Aluminum strips, cut lengths, bundled for sequence." The civilian stepped forward. "What lengths?" he asked. Mercer chose numbers carefully. "Some packets are around 25 centimeters," he said. "Some are longer. The point is resonance. Half wavelength, enough to reflect hard." The civilian's tape measure slid out with a soft snap. He did not measure the foil. He measured the chute mouth. He measured the distance between brackets. He wrote his own numbers in a small notebook, not in Mercer's logbook. Voss cleared his throat. "Within specifications," he said, trying to recover the old language. The headquarters officer cut him off. Within spec didn't bring crews back last week, he said. His voice was flat, not angry, final. Mercer felt the phrase land like a weight. Pilot error. Within spec. Those words had protected the institution. They had not protected men. The headquarters officer pointed at the chute mouth. Feed it, he said. Mercer pushed the packet into the chute and waited for the snag that used to happen on the ground. It did not snag. The wire spring gripped and released in one smooth motion. The packet slid through with a clean drop. The moment was simple. It was also dangerous. A single smooth drop was a confession. The civilian leaned closer. Eyes narrowing. He saw the spring. He saw the tape. His hand lifted as if to touch it. Then stopped. That is not factory, the civilian said. Voss stiffened. No authorization. He began. The headquarters officer raised one finger. Stop, he said. He did not look at Voss. He looked at Mercer. How many aircraft used this last night? Mercer could have lied. He could have said one. He could have made it an isolated mistake. Easier to bury. He chose the truth that mattered. 2 aircraft in our flight. He said. Same chute issue. Same fix. Same timing. Owen, standing just beyond the circle, did not move. His thumb was wrapped in cloth. His face gave nothing away. The headquarters officer nodded once. He looked back to the civilian. What is the risk, he asked. The civilian opened his leather case and pulled out a small scale, the kind used for springs and tension checks. He hooked it to the chute edge and pulled until the wire spring flexed. About 4 pounds. The civilian said quietly, give or take. Enough to change feed behavior. Voss seized the opening. Factory tolerances exist for a reason, he said. If this breaks loose in flight, it becomes debris in the bay. It could foul wiring. It could jam doors. Did it break loose? The headquarters officer asked. No, Mercer said. It held. One packet tore at 0326. I cleared it. The feed continued. The headquarters officer's eyes flicked to Mercer's bandaged knuckle and then to the faint blood smear still visible on the plywood. Half cleaned. Not quite gone. Evidence. Small and human. The civilian spoke again. It is an unauthorized modification, he said. It would void warranty if this were a civilian machine. There it was. The exact phrase. Spoken out loud. Void warranty. The headquarters officer did not flinch. He made the dilemma visible in a single sentence. If we do nothing, he said, we lose crews. If we do it without authority, we lose control. Mercer heard the word control and understood. Window itself was control. It was control of what the enemy could see. Now the institution wanted control of its own crews. The headquarters officer took Mercer's logbook and flipped pages. He read the neat handwriting. He saw the absence where the wire spring should have been recorded. He did not accuse. He simply held the book like a weapon. Why isn't it written down? He asked. Mercer's throat tightened. He could not say. Because you would stop me. He could not say. Because you would call it pilot error. So he used the only language the system respected. Because the next raid is tonight. He said. Because it takes 11 minutes to fit. Because Hamburg is 500 miles away. A long silence followed. The airfield felt suddenly louder. A lorry backfired. A distant Merlin coughed as a mechanic tested magnetos. Somewhere, a telephone rang and kept ringing. Then the headquarters officer made a decision that was not quite permission and not quite refusal. You will demonstrate this on 3 aircraft, he said. Here, today, in front of me. Voss opened his mouth to object. The headquarters officer turned his head slightly, not looking at him, and added the institutional shield that let men do illegal things inside legal frames. This is a controlled trial, he said. A temporary fitment. Logged. Witnessed. The civilian nodded once, already turning pages in his notebook as if the words controlled trial had conjured a form into existence. Mercer felt relief for half a second. Then he felt the next danger. A controlled trial meant attention. Attention meant inspection. Inspection meant someone might pull at the spring, measure it, and ask why it existed at all. It also meant other crews would hear. Crews did not wait for paperwork when death was scheduled for dusk. Owen stepped closer and spoke for the first time. "If you log it," he said, "you slow it." The headquarters officer looked at him. "If you don't log it," he replied, "you can't repeat it." Mercer saw the paradox sharpen. The tiny thing worked because it was simple. It would fail if it became a committee. Voss scribbled on his clipboard. Jaw tight. The civilian wrote numbers. The headquarters officer tore a sheet from Mercer's logbook and tucked it into his own folder. At Noa Doisprezeche. An order runner arrived. Breathless, carrying a sealed envelope, he handed it to the headquarters officer, who opened it with one thumb and read without expression. "Tonight," the officer said, and the word settled like flak. "Hamburg again. Same window. Same stream. And now we do this in daylight first." He pointed at Mercer's Lancaster, then at two others parked nose to tail in dispersal. "Get the tools," he said. "Get the wire. We start in 10 minutes. At 0815 on 24 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer slid back into the open bomb bay and held a wrapped window packet in both hands. The headquarters officer stood at the wing root with a watch. Flight Lieutenant Voss hovered half a step behind him. The civilian kept his tape and spring scale ready, as if tension could be made safe by measurement alone. 10 minutes. The headquarters officer said, 3 aircraft. Same feed rate. Same tension. Mercer nodded. He could feel sweat under his collar despite the morning chill. He was not afraid of German fighters right now. He was afraid of paperwork turning into a weapon. Owen climbed into the second Lancaster's bay and copied Mercer's movements by sight. He carried a length of parachute static line wire and a file. He did not ask permission. He did not wait for Voss to speak. He bent the wire into the same shallow U, taped the ends, and pressed it into the chute mouth until it bit with that familiar 4-pound resistance. The civilian stepped in. He hooked his scale. He pulled. 3.5. He said, 4. Repeatable. Voss wrote quickly. His jaw stayed tight. He wanted the words within specifications to win. The numbers were winning instead. They ran the first trial at 0827. Packet in. Release. Clean drop. No snag. They ran the second at 0831. 2 packets in sequence. Timed to a counted rhythm. 1 Mississippi. 2. 3. The chute held. The spring released. The packets fell away without tearing. They ran the third at 0836. Mercer deliberately fed a packet slightly off-center to simulate the worst case. It still cleared. The spring corrected the angle. The plywood did not bite. The paper did not jam. The headquarters officer looked at Mercer's palm, where a thin cut still shone red. "How many jams last night?" he asked. 1, Mercer said, at Trey Doazet Shishase. Cleared in seconds. Feed continued. The officer turned to Voss. "Log the modification," he said. "Witness it. Don't argue it." Voss opened his mouth, then stopped. He wrote the phrase that saved careers. Controlled trial fitment. He put down, and then added a second phrase that made it real. To be repeated operationally. The paradox tightened again. The institution was adopting the trick, but it was also taking it away. At Noa Chinch, the headquarters officer walked Mercer to a low building where raid returns were being collated. A map of northern Germany covered the wall. Colored pins marked targets. A stack of forms sat on a table, each one a story reduced to ink. He pointed at a line of numbers from the night's raid. 791 aircraft dispatched. He said, reading from the sheet. 12 lost. He paused. That is not normal for Hamburg. Mercer said nothing. He had lived the missing squares on the notice board. The headquarters officer tapped the paper again. If Window did this, he said, we will use it again. But we will use it as a system, not as a rumor. Outside, rumor was already moving. At Zech, Mercer walked past another dispersal and saw two men carrying window packets under their jackets like contraband cigarettes. He heard a corporal say, "Tinfoil," and laugh. But it was not mockery now. It was relief. It was superstition turning into practice. At Unsprezacher, a sergeant from a neighboring squadron found Mercer by the servicing bay and spoke in a whisper. "What's the tension?" he asked. "How many pounds?" "4. Mercer said. "Don't exceed it." "How long to fit?" the sergeant pressed. 11 minutes, if you don't rush," Mercer said. "And don't leave bright tape showing." The concealment method changed with daylight. Crews painted the wire dull. They wrapped it in canvas. They used existing screw holes so the brackets looked untouched. Inspectors checked fuse settings and bomb shackle locks. They did not carry spring scales. They did not look for a gentle bite of tension in the mouth of a plywood chute. By 13:30, Voss had a list. 6 aircraft, then 12, then an entire flight. He did not call it a modification anymore. He called it standardized feed adjustment. The words were smoother. The act was the same. The day wore on. Ground crews replaced panels and patched flak holes. A hydraulic line was tightened. A magneto was swapped. Men slept in chairs for 40 minutes at a time. The airfield ran on short naps and strong tea. In Germany, the enemy reaction was forming in parallel. Reports from radar sites and fighter controllers, stitched together after the fact, described confusion that morning. Screens cluttered, bearings unreliable, intercepts missed. Some controllers reportedly blamed equipment faults. Others blamed operator error. The same reflex existed on both sides of the sea. Pilot error, within spec. By 18:00, the headquarters officer returned with a new instruction written in ink. Not pencil. Window to be used by the bomber stream. It read. The phrasing was careful. It did not explain how. It did not credit anyone. It turned a crew's bloodied improvisation into policy. Mercer watched Voss file the paper into a folder without looking at him. The folder had no place for knuckles cut on burrs. It had a place for signatures. At Dawazech. The next briefing began. Hamburg again was discussed as if it were a coordinate. Not a city. A time window was given. A route was set. The stream would lift between 2145 and 2300. Like the night before, the first markers would go down around 0057. The main force would begin bombing near 0102 and be gone before 0150. Numbers, timings, distance. Mercer returned to his Lancaster at 2210. He climbed into the fuselage and felt for the maintenance logbook in his pocket. He opened it under a shaded light and saw Voss's new entry. Neat and official. Feed adjustment fitted and tested. It said, no wire mentioned. No blood. No origin. Owen met his eyes once and said nothing. At Dawazech. Engines started. 4 Merlins. The familiar cough and catch. The runway lights stayed low. The night swallowed the aircraft one by one. At Dawazech. Wheels left the ground. The Lancaster climbed into cloud and leveled near 18,000 feet. Mercer crawled toward the bomb bay and put his hand on the chute mouth, feeling the spring's pressure through the plywood. It was there. It was standardized now. It was also still illegal in its bones. At 0:00, the navigator called the approach to the coast. Mercer slid the first window packet into the chute and listened for the clean release. Then, from the rear turret, a new voice cut through the intercom. Sharp and immediate. Fires ahead, the gunner said, and fighters using the glow. At 0055 on 25 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer braced his boots against the fuselage frame and fed window packets into the chute by rhythm. The Lancaster held close to 18,000 feet as the bomber stream approached the German coast. The bomb bay doors were open. The slipstream roared. The foil bundles disappeared downward one after another. Each one meant to turn precision into noise. The rear gunner's warning still hung in the intercom. "Fires ahead," he had said, and fighters using the glow. Mercer understood the threat immediately. Window could blind radar. It could not blind eyes. Hamburg had burned the night before. Smoke would linger. The city would glow again. That glow could outline aircraft against cloud and make them visible to pilots hunting in the dark. The doctrine did not change. Never break the stream. Use the prescribed height. Don't talk. Corkscrew on the first warning. Trust the route markers. Mercer had tried that doctrine 19 times. It hadn't worked. He pushed packet 6 through and counted. 1 Mississippi. 2. 3. Packet 2. The chute released cleanly with the 4-pound bite of the hidden spring. The controlled trial had become routine in less than 18 hours. Outside. The foil cloud thickened behind them. The first radar stations would already be seeing it. A false front. A smeared picture. The stream wrapped in a veil of reflections. But the glow ahead grew brighter. At Unushabde, the navigator gave a calm update. "Approaching the Elbe," he said. A river name reduced to a waypoint. The pilot adjusted heading by a few degrees. The Lancaster's engines maintained a steady note. Around 400 revolutions per minute at cruise power. The flak began at 0112, not heavy yet. Probing bursts. A few shells rising to check altitude and range. Black puffs against the faint orange wash on the horizon. Mercer kept feeding packets. Window was not a single drop. It was a sustained action. If you stopped, the radar picture could rebuild itself in minutes. If you fed too fast, you created a dense cloud that drifted and left gaps. It was a balance done by hand. In turbulence. With blood-stiff bandages. At Unuoptsprezeche. Mercer felt the Lancaster jolt. A fragment struck the Bombay edge with a metallic snap. The aircraft shuddered once. The engineer reported it immediately. No pressure loss. Owen said, "All 4 steady." Mercer's left hand checked the chute mouth without looking. The wire spring still held. The plywood still guided. No yam. The first enemy contact came at 0123. "Fighter," the rear gunner said. "Starboard quarter. High." There was no radar warning in the cockpit. No clean bandit at 2 miles. Just a shape against glow. A pair of wings. A dark body. Twin engines or one. Hard to tell. The pilot snapped the Lancaster into a shallow turn. The engineer called out boost settings. The gunners swung their turrets by feel and short glimpses. The mid-upper gunner fired a short burst. The tracers were visible for a second, then swallowed by darkness. The fighter did not press in close. It slid away, then reappeared lower, using the city's light like a stage lamp. Mercer did not fire anything. His weapon was still the foil leaving the aircraft. He fed packet 14, then 15, keeping the trail continuous. Somewhere below, Hamburg lit the cloud base from beneath. The glow turned the underside of the bomber stream into a moving ceiling. It gave night fighters a reference they did not need radar for. It also gave the bomber crews something else, a sense of distance to the target, a countdown written in light. Atunu Trezich. The bombardier called. "Stand by." Bomb run was near. Time over target would be short. 90 seconds. Maybe 2 minutes. That was when the fighters liked to strike. Bombers flew straight. Bombers held steady. Bombers did not corkscrew while aiming. Window could not change that. Mercer heard the institutional refrain in his own head. Pilot error. Within spec. The phrases now applied to gunners, too. If a fighter got through tonight, someone would blame training, not the limits of the system. The Lancaster leveled on the bomb run at 0133. The air felt suddenly smooth. as if the machine had decided to cooperate for this one moment. The flak thickened. Bursts walked up toward their altitude. The cockpit grew quiet except for call-outs. At 134. Mercer fed packet 18 and then stopped for a beat. The bomb run demanded it. His hands hovered. Ready. Waiting for the next command. A sharp crack came from the rear. Not flak. Gunfire. Fighter closing. The rear gunner shouted, "He's using the glow." The pilot held steady. The bombardier needed the line. A Lancaster on a bomb run was a straight target. Mercer heard the rear turret fire in a sustained burst. The aircraft shook with the vibration. The mid-upper joined in. Tracers cut across the orange haze. The fighter's silhouette crossed behind them, then dipped away. A second later, something punched the Lancaster's skin. A dull thud. Then another. The engineer's voice snapped. "Hydraulic pressure down," Owen said, dropping fast. The pilot reacted instantly. "Bombs gone," he said. The release was violent. The Lancaster jumped as thousands of pounds left. The aircraft felt lighter. Twitchier. The pilot broke the straight line and rolled into a hard turn. He began a corkscrew. Faster than doctrine advised. Because doctrine did not account for a fighter using city firelight as aim. Mercer grabbed the table edge and kept his head from slamming into the bulkhead. The bomber twisted. Dropped. Climbed. Rolled. The bomb bay doors were still open. The slipstream became a hammer. A window packet slid out of its crate and struck Mercer's forearm. He caught it. His bandaged knuckle tore open again. Pain flashed bright. He clenched his jaw and shoved the packet into the chute as the aircraft rolled, trusting the wire spring to do what his hands could not. It released, clean, even in a corkscrew. That mattered, because if the crew had to choose between evasive action and maintaining the window trail, the system would fail. The tiny thing had to work under stress or it was not a weapon. At 138. The fighter returned. The rear gunner's voice was strained. "He's back," he said. "Lower. Closing." The pilot rolled again. The Lancaster lost 800 feet in seconds, then regained 400. The altimeter needle swung. The navigator called out drift. The engineer called out the hydraulic situation. Pressure near zero. Owen said, "Doors may not close." Mercer's eyes went to the bomb bay controls. If doors stayed open, drag increased. Fuel burn climbed. Airspeed dropped. The Lancaster would become easier prey. He reached for the manual override crank, feeling for it in the vibration. He turned it 2 full rotations. Then 4. The mechanism fought him, without pressure. It was all muscle. His cut palm slipped on the handle. He nearly lost grip. He tightened again and turned until his forearm burned. A scraping sound ran along the fuselage. The doors shifted. Not fully closed, but less open, less drag. At 142, the fighter finally broke off. The rear gunner exhaled. "Lost him," he said. "He's gone into the glow." Mercer kept feeding window. Packet 22. Packet 23. The trail continued behind them. A drifting curtain in the sky. This was the enemy reaction changing shape in real time. Radar was blinded, so the fighters adapted. They used firelight. They used eyesight. They hunted where the sky was lit. Window had not ended the danger. It had moved it. By 1:55. The Lancaster was on the withdrawal leg again, heading toward the North Sea. The glow of Hamburg was behind them. The flak thinned. The engines steadied. The hydraulic pressure did not return. Owen's voice came over the intercom. "Quieter now. If the doors don't close," he said, "we may not make it back to Skellingthorpe." Mercer looked at the logbook tucked near his knee. Voss's official entry stared back at him. Feed adjustment fitted and tested. No mention of tonight's damage. No mention of the manual crank turning in blood. Then the navigator spoke, pointing to the next problem without drama. "Coast behind us," he said, "but the radar rooms will be watching the sea lanes now." At 0202 on 25 July, 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer stayed at the manual crank, turning it in slow. Steady pulls as the Lancaster crossed back over water. The North Sea was black and empty below. The altimeter held near 16, 800 feet after the evasive dives. The hydraulic gauge still read near 0. The bomb bay doors had crept inward, but they were not sealed. Drag remained. Fuel was bleeding away as minutes. Owen's voice had been clear. If the doors don't close, we may not make it back to Skellingthorpe. Mercer answered with numbers. How much fuel margin? He asked. Owen paused, doing the math from gauges and burn rates. At this drag, he said, we lose about 20 to 30 miles of margin, maybe more if we fight headwinds. The navigator added a time anchor like a nail. We are 210 miles from the English coast, he said, roughly 1 hour and 10 minutes. If we hold speed. Mercer turned the crank again. One full rotation, then another. His palm slipped on the handle as blood re-wet the grip. He tore a strip from his rag and wrapped the handle for friction. It was a small fix to keep a larger system moving. The same logic as window, now applied to survival. The Lancaster shuddered once in turbulence. The doors shifted a fraction. Not closed. Better. Mercer could imagine the radar rooms behind them. Still trying to rebuild a picture. Window clouds would be drifting over Germany now. Spreading. Thinning. Still reflecting. Controllers would be arguing about what was real. Some would blame their equipment. Some would blame their operators. Within spec, operator error. But over water. Radar was still useful. A returning bomber stream was easier to plot than an inbound one. The sea offered fewer reflections. The enemy could still vector fighters toward the lanes if their screens cleared. Adoi obsprezecher. The rear gunner called out a faint sound. Engines behind. He said, maybe. The pilot did not ask questions. He acted. He pushed the Lancaster down 300 feet to pick up speed. The engineer adjusted power to keep the Merlins from overboosting. The gunners scanned the dark. There was no glow now to silhouette an attacker. If a night fighter was there, it would be relying on instruments again. Mercer's hands did not stop turning the crank. At 2:03. The navigator spoke. Radio silence. He reminded. The doctrine still mattered. Don't talk. Don't glow. Don't give a vector away. The irony was sharp. The bomber stream had just dropped metal into the sky to blind radar. And now they had to become quiet dots again. Mercer reached for the maintenance logbook with his left hand and pulled it closer, shielding it from the draft. The pages fluttered. The pencil entries looked clean and official, as if the aircraft had not just been shot through and bled oil and hydraulic fluid into the night. There was a new entry Owen had written during the withdrawal. Short and cautious. Hydraulic pressure lost over target. Doors partially open. Manual crank engaged. That line mattered. It was traceable. It was accountable. It was also dangerous. A logbook was a confession the institution could not ignore. Mercer stared at the words and felt the dilemma from the headquarters officer made real. If you log it, you slow it. If you don't log it, you can't repeat it. Now the logbook would force questions, not only about hydraulic damage, but about why the doors were hard to close in the first place, about the chute, about the wire spring, about the tiny thing. At 2:13, the rear gunner's voice returned. Sharper. Fighter, he said. Port quarter. Far. The pilot rolled slightly, changing course by a few degrees. The Lancaster's exhausts were masked as best they could be. The gunners held fire. Fire revealed position. The doctrine was cruel but rational. Mercer kept turning the crank. The doors edged inward another inch. The roar of slipstream eased slightly. Airspeed climbed by a few miles an hour. 10 miles an hour at this stage could be the difference between ditching and landing. The fighter did not close. Perhaps it lost them. Perhaps its controller could not hold a plot through the residual clutter. Perhaps the pilot could not find a silhouette in pure darkness. Windows effect was invisible, but it could still be felt in the gaps where death should have been. Ad doi patrezeci opt. The navigator called. English coast in 20. The pilot exhaled once. Not relief. Calculation. Landing a Lancaster with damaged hydraulics was its own risk. Flaps, brakes, and undercarriage depended on systems that could fail. There were manual methods, but they took time and strength. Mercer's arms were already burning. At Tre Chinch. They crossed the coast. The Lancaster descended gradually, bleeding altitude in controlled steps. Chasseur. 000 feet. Sure. Lin Lin Lin. Leo. Lin Lin Lin. The engines throttled back. The aircraft felt heavy again. Not from bombs, but from damage and fatigue. At Tre Doazet Doi. Skellingthorpe's low lights appeared. A faint pattern on the ground. Other returning aircraft circled like tired birds, each one waiting its turn. The radio remained mostly silent, but lamp signals flashed from the tower. The pilot spoke at last, low and direct. "Prepare for manual gear," he said. Owen moved forward. He began the hand pump routine with practiced speed. Each pump stroke was a number, a count, a rhythm. 30 strokes, 50, 70. The undercarriage indicator lights flickered, then steadied. 2 greens, then 3. Mercer did not stop turning the bomb bay crank until the doors finally met with a dull, satisfying thump at 0329. The roar vanished. The aircraft felt suddenly cleaner, smoother. The fuel margin stopped hemorrhaging. He leaned back against the fuselage wall and let his hands shake once. Then still. The Lancaster touched down at 0341. The landing was hard but straight. The brakes were weak. The aircraft rolled long, then slowed, then turned off. When the engines cut, the silence was physical. Mercer climbed out into dawn air that smelled of wet grass and burnt oil. He watched ground crewmen move in, counting holes, checking lines, writing numbers on clipboards. Flight Lieutenant Voss was waiting near the dispersal, as if he had not slept at all. The headquarters officer was with him again. And now there were more men in plain clothes, more measuring tapes, more notebooks. Voss held out Mercer's maintenance logbook without looking up. "Group wants a full accounting," he said. "They want every change documented." Mercer took the book. He saw Owen's hydraulic entry. He saw Voss's neat feed adjustment fitted and tested. He saw the gaps where truth had been hidden. The headquarters officer stepped closer. His tone was quiet and final. "Hamburg again tomorrow," he said, "and Berlin will come. If this works, we scale it. If it doesn't, we stop it." Then he pointed at the bomb bay and asked the one question nobody had asked before. "Who designed this chute?" he said. "And who decided it was within spec to jam at 200 miles an hour? At 0346 on 25 July 1943. Flying Officer Alan Mercer stood beside the Lancaster's open bomb bay as the headquarters officer pointed up into the shadowed belly. "Who designed this chute?" the officer asked. "And who decided it was within spec to jam at 200 miles an hour? Mercer kept his eyes on the plywood mouth and the dull grey wire hidden inside it. Flight Lieutenant Voss held the maintenance logbook like it might bite him. Owen stood half a pace behind Mercer, thumb wrapped, face expressionless. The civilian with the tape measure, Mr. Talbot, waited with his spring scale already unhooked, as if the question had been expected. Mercer answered carefully. "It was fitted by a modification party," he said. "Standard kit. The chute mouth is sized for gravity feed, not slipstream feed." The headquarters officer's jaw tightened. "That answer," he said, "puts blame on nobody." Voss tried to regain ground. "Factory tolerances," he said. "It passed inspection. It is within specifications." Mercer heard the refrain again, and this time It sounded like an enemy language. Talbot broke the rhythm with a number. At 200 miles an hour, he said. The pressure at the bay opening changes the packet angle. A millimeter of lip can catch paper. A 4-pound spring corrects it. 4 pounds? 11 minutes. 1 millimeter. The war turning on measurements. The headquarters officer nodded once, then made the discovery official without making it public. This stays inside the group, he said. No rumors beyond our fence. He tapped the logbook. Everything goes in here. He added, every trial, every failure, every injury. Voss flinched at the word failure, as if it were disloyal. Mercer opened the logbook and stared at the page. Owen's line about hydraulics sat there like a bruise. Voss's feed adjustment entry sat above it like a mask. Mercer could feel the paper demanding truth. By 5:20. A controlled team formed anyway, because the raids did not pause for discipline. 1 officer, 1 civilian engineer, 1 squadron engineering lead, 1 crewman who had bled in the bay. Mercer. The system had found a way to keep the fix while controlling the story. At Chassezich, they moved to a hangar with doors shut, away from idle eyes. Talbot laid out window strips on canvas and measured them in silence. Voss measured the chute lip with calipers, reading off numbers like absolution. Mercer stood by the aircraft belly with a flashlight, pointing at burrs and snag points he had felt in darkness. Not seen. Talbot circled one edge in pencil. Here, he said. This catches paper at speed. Voss shook his head. Within tolerances, he insisted. Talbot looked up. Tolerances for what? He asked. For a peacetime drop test. The question landed like the headquarters officer's question. It forced a choice. By 8:30. They had a written artifact that mattered more than argument. A single typed sheet titled Window Dispenser Feed Irregularities. It listed 3 failures, 2 clean releases, 1 tear at 0326. It listed the remedy: spring tension 4 pounds, canvas tape wrap, dull primer finish, fit time 11 minutes. It included the phrase that kept authority intact: temporary operational measure pending redesign. Mercer saw his blood turned into a line item. The secret spread anyway, because survival spreads faster than orders. By midday, Mercer watched ground crewmen from 2 other squadrons walking with short lengths of wire tucked into their sleeves. He heard pilots asking, quietly, "Are you feeding window smooth?" He saw a corporal painting wire dull grey beside a fuel bowser as if it were routine maintenance. The concealment method evolved with the attention. They stopped using bright tape. They used canvas tape in the same shade as chute seams. They sanded the wire ends until no fresh metal showed. They matched screw heads with existing paint, so an inspector's quick glance found nothing new. Inspectors checked bomb shackles, fuse arming, oxygen bottle pressure, and turret traverses. They did not hook spring scales to plywood lips. Nobody noticed. Mercer heard someone whisper again. And it was no longer comfort. It was doctrine. The numbers began to shift in the only place the war admitted change: the loss columns. Unit reports noted that the first Hamburg night, 24 July, cost fewer aircraft than crews expected for a raid of that size. The second night brought fighters into firelight. But the radar picture still broke in ways controllers did not like. The third night of the series added another layer, more crews dropping window earlier, more consistently, with fewer jams in the stream. At 1940 on 25 July, the headquarters officer returned to dispersal with a folded sheet of figures. He did not smile. He simply read, "Dispatch count similar." He said, "Losses down compared to early July." He tapped the paper. "Not gone. Down." Mercer understood what that meant. Down meant names not removed from a board. Down meant 7 men eating breakfast at 0630 instead of becoming a square of empty cork. Germany reacted like an institution under pressure, because it was won. Some reports described radar stations attempting to adjust gain and filtering, trying to separate false clouds from true echoes. Others described controllers forcing fighters into broader boxes, increasing patrol time, burning fuel, and still missing the stream. The vocabulary changed. Not enemy bomber stream, but uncertain contacts. Not vector, but search. Operator error, equipment fault, within spec. At 12:07. Voss faced his dilemma in a way he could not escape. A message arrived from higher headquarters requesting details of the window method and any unofficial adaptations. The word unofficial was a knife. Voss held the message in one hand and Mercer's logbook in the other. He looked tired in a way rank could not hide. If this reaches the Air Ministry, Voss said, voice low, they will want names. They will want authorization chains. They will want someone to blame if something goes wrong. Mercer answered without heat. If it doesn't reach them, he said, it stays rumor. And rumors die. Owen added one sentence. Quieter than both. Men die faster, he said. Voss stared at the typed sheet Talbot had produced, the one that turned the spring into temporary operational measure. He could see the path. Official adoption without credit. Safety without acknowledgement. The paradox at the center of it all. He took a pencil and wrote in the logbook's margin. Small and tight. Spring tension verified 4 pounds. Fitment approved for operational trial by group. He did not write Mercer's name. At 12:05. Talbot arrived with a second typed page and a new phrase that sounded like bureaucracy, but meant survival. Standardization order. It read, chute lip to be smoothed. Spring insert to be fitted where required. It still avoided the word wire. The headquarters officer tucked both pages into his folder and gave Mercer a concrete next action. His voice was calm. His eyes were not. Tomorrow, at 1400, he said, you will brief a visiting inspector on the dispenser feed. He will be standing where you stood, and you will demonstrate it on a live aircraft. At 1400 on 26 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer stood under a Lancaster at RAF Skellingthorpe with his shoulders pressed to cold metal. His hands were inside the bomb bay again. He was feeling for the chute mouth by touch, checking the spring's bite before anyone else could. A visiting inspector waited 3 yards away. Wing Commander Harris. A clean uniform. A clipped voice. And a notebook that looked heavier than a pistol. Flight Lieutenant Voss stood at his shoulder like a shield. Mr. Talbot hovered behind them with his leather case, tape measure, and spring scale. Owen leaned on a tool chest, thumbs still wrapped, eyes fixed on Mercer's hands. The inspector spoke without greeting. I am told you are modifying aircraft without authorization, he said. I am told it involves window. Voss tried to intercept. It is a controlled trial, he said. Group sanctioned. Harris did not look at him. Show me, he said. Mercer slid out from under the bay and stood, wiping grease onto his coveralls as if it were routine. He did not look at Harris's eyes for long. Inspectors were trained to find a single deviation and name it. Mercer reached into a crate and lifted a window packet. Brown paper. String. A black number. He held it up in the daylight. This is dropped at speed, Mercer said. If it snags, the trail breaks. Harris's pen moved. Within specifications, he said, as if testing the phrase on his tongue. You claim the kit is within specifications. Voss seized the chance. The kit is within factory tolerances, he said quickly. Any adjustment risks void warranty. It is not authorized. Mercer heard the words and felt the old reflex tightening around his throat. Void warranty. No authorization. Factory tolerances. The phrases were a fence built to keep order. They could also keep men from adapting. Talbot opened his leather case and laid out the typed sheet on the tool chest. The title was stark. Window dispenser feed irregularities. The page showed 3 columns of numbers and a line that mattered more than any argument. Spring tension 4 pounds. It read, fit time 11 minutes. Harris's eyes dropped to the paper. He did not smile. He did not frown. He treated it like a report of damage. You are using a spring, he said. A wire spring. Talbot answered for the system. A spring insert. He said, temporary operational measure pending redesign. Harris looked at Mercer's bandage, now replaced with fresh cloth. Show me the feed, he said. Mercer climbed into the bomb bay and knelt beside the chute. He placed the packet at the mouth. He pushed it in. He felt the spring grip. He felt it release. The packet slid out cleanly and vanished into empty air. Harris stepped forward, closer than the others. He looked into the chute mouth and finally saw the dull grey curve, the canvas tape, the filed edges. He touched it with one finger. His finger paused on the tape, as if he could feel the difference between factory and field through cloth. Who installed this? He asked. Voss inhaled sharply. Owen's jaw clenched. Talbot kept his eyes on the paper. Not the men. Mercer answered with a truth designed to survive. The squadron, he said, under group trial. Harris looked back at the typed sheet. Names, he said. Rank and trade. The request was not cruelty. It was procedure. Procedure always wanted a name. Mercer felt the paradox tighten again. The fix saved crews because it was simple. It would be crushed if it became a case file. Voss tried to offer a safe target. Modification party, he said. Standard fitters. No single man. Harris's gaze did not move. There is always a single man, he said. Someone first did it. Mercer heard the bombers starting up across the field as other aircraft were readied for the next night. The Merlins coughed and caught. The airfield never stopped long enough for morality. It only stopped long enough for maintenance. Mercer placed his hand on the logbook on the tool chest. The pages were open. Voss's entry stared back. Spring tension verified 4 pounds. Fitment approved for operational trial by group. It was written in the margin. Small and tight. No name. Mercer tapped the line once. This is the authorization, he said. This is the chain. Harris read it. His pen hovered. He was caught between two loyalties, one to rules, one to outcomes. He chose the one that let him keep both. I will not require names today. Harris said, I will require standardization. Voss blinked. Talbot's shoulders eased by an inch. Owen did not move at all. Harris pointed into the bomb bay. This cannot remain hidden, he said. Hidden things become accidents. If it is required, it must be specified. If it is specified, it must be produced properly. Talbot nodded quickly. A redesigned chute lip, he said. Smoothed edge, corrected angle, manufactured spring insert. Harris's pen scratched. Within specifications, he said again, but now it sounded different. It sounded like a demand. Not a defense. We bring it within spec. Mercer watched him write the words that would change the war in a quiet way. The order was not dramatic. It was a sentence on a page. Authorized temporary spring insert for window chutes. Harris wrote, to be recorded in logs. To be inspected. Mercer felt a cold wave of understanding. The institution was adopting the fix. It was also taking possession of it. The wire spring would become an insert. The blood would become an incident. The first hands would disappear. Harris folded the typed sheet and slipped it into his notebook. He did not return it. He did not thank Mercer. He simply turned toward Voss. Get this to group by 1600, he said, and to the ministry by tomorrow. Voss nodded. Face pale. He knew what that meant. More eyes. More questions. More chances for blame to find a body. Harris stopped once more at the bomb bay edge and looked back at Mercer. His voice lowered. Almost human. If this fails, he said, they will call it pilot error. They will call it within spec. They will say the men did it wrong. Mercer did not answer. He already knew. Harris walked away. At Preisprezecher. The headquarters officer returned to dispersal with a new piece of paper in his hand. Stamped and signed. He held it out to Mercer without ceremony. Berlin is being discussed, he said, and the Germans are adapting. They are changing patrol boxes. They are searching by firelight. They are not blind anymore. He pointed to Mercer's Lancaster. Tonight, he said, we test the only question that matters. He leaned in, voice tight. Can your tiny thing keep working when the enemy stops laughing and starts learning? At 2340 on 26 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer knelt inside the Lancaster's bomb bay with his shoulders wedged against a frame member. The aircraft was at 500 feet over the North Sea. The airspeed held near 205 miles an hour. The bomb bay doors were open. The chute mouth was cold under his fingers. The spring insert was there. Now logged. Now inspected. Now officially temporary. Mercer could still feel the day's paper in his pocket. The authorization line. The inspector's sentence. The new order that made the fix visible and therefore vulnerable. The headquarters officer's question still rang. Can it keep working when the enemy stops laughing and starts learning? The first window packets went out at 2346. Earlier than before. The stream had been instructed to seed the sky sooner. To create a wider corridor of clutter. Mercer fed by rhythm. 1 Mississippi. 2. 3. Packet after packet. He felt the spring grip. He felt it release. The feed was smooth. Behind them, miles of aluminum drifted and tumbled. Each strip reflected radar pulses like a small blade. Thousands became a fog. A fog became false formations. The mechanics were simple. The effect was not. Germany had not remained still. Unit summaries later described changes. Radar stations adjusted their displays. Controllers widened their search zones. Fighters were pushed into longer patrols, burning fuel to compensate for uncertainty. Some reports suggested certain stations tried to burn through clutter by increasing power and changing interpretation rather than treating every echo as a true aircraft. They were learning. At 0009 on 27 July, the navigator called the German coast. The Lancaster crossed in at 800 feet. The sky ahead was darker than Hamburg nights. Less glow. More cloud. That should have helped. Darkness favored the bomber. Window favored the bomber. The math pointed one way. But the enemy had another way to hunt. At 0 Preisprezecher. The rear gunner spoke sharply. Up there, he said. High. A single. No glow. No searchlight. Just a shape that seemed to appear where none should. Mercer kept feeding window and listened for the next cue. The gunners tracked by instinct. The pilot held the stream's discipline. Never break. Use the height. Don't talk. The doctrine now had a new companion. Keep the foil trail unbroken. At 0 Preisprezecher. The first tracer arcs flashed far behind them. Not at them. At someone else in the stream. A brief red line. Then darkness. Then a bloom of orange that hinted at an aircraft hit. Mercer felt his stomach tighten and forced his hands to stay steady. The bombers were not alone in the sky. They never were. But tonight the fighters seemed to be finding targets without the usual lead-in. As if a controller had learned to read the clutter differently. As if the snow on the screen had patterns inside it. At 0 Chapter. Flak began in scattered bursts. The Lancaster bumped once. The engineer called out minor changes. Starboard outer oil temp up 5. Owen said, all else steady. Mercer opened the maintenance logbook on the wireless table between feeds. He forced himself to look at the lines. The logbook had become a second battlefield. What you wrote became what the institution believed. He saw the inspector's authorization written by Voss in tight pencil. Temporary spring insert authorized for window chutes. Record in logs. Inspect. Mercer wrote one more line beneath it. Neat despite turbulence. Feed uninterrupted at 205 miles per hour. No jams observed by 0030. A small sentence, a small truth, the kind that later became policy. At 0:30 patru. The stream turned toward the target corridor. The Pathfinder timings were strict. Marker flares. Target indicators. Then the main force. The Lancaster's run would be measured in minutes. At 0:30 Noah. The rear gunner shouted again. Fighter closing. He said, no lights. He's on instruments. That line changed everything. It meant the enemy had regained enough of a picture to vector a fighter close without searchlights. It meant window had not ended radar direction. It had forced it to become harder, slower, more uncertain, but not impossible. The pilot began a shallow weave, gentle enough to maintain the stream, enough to spoil a clean approach. The mid-upper turret swung. The rear turret fired a short burst. The fighter did not break off. Mercer fed another packet. He felt the spring grip and release. The tiny thing still worked, but now it was only one part of survival, not the whole. At 0:30, the Lancaster took hits, not heavy cannon strikes that tore structure apart, but punctures, a dull thump, then another. The engineer's voice snapped. Fuel pressure fluctuation. Owen said, check leaks. Mercer smelled it a second later. Aviation fuel. Sharp. Raw. He looked down and saw a thin sheen on metal where there should have been dry skin. Self-sealing tanks could slow a leak. Not stop everyone. A single line could still weep. The pilot did not panic. He asked for numbers. Rate, he said. Owen answered fast. Not catastrophic. Watch at it. Mercer's hands did not stop. He fed packets and counted. He was now feeding a weapon while his aircraft bled. At 0:30. The target glow appeared faintly through cloud. Not Hamburg's furnace, but a low smear that marked a city already bruised by weeks of war. The flak thickened as they neared. The bomber stream tightened. And that tightening made every mistake contagious. At 0:30. The fighter came back. The rear gunner's voice cracked. He's in close, he said, right under. The pilot held for the bomb run. 90 seconds. That was the discipline. The bombardier called. Steady. Mercer felt the old dread. Straight and level under flak was bad. Straight and level under a fighter was worse. The Lancaster shuddered as flak burst near. The cockpit stayed calm. The bombardier counted seconds. The navigator held course. Then the bombs released at 0101. The aircraft jumped. The pilot immediately broke the line and rolled into a corkscrew. The gunners fired. The fighter slid away, then disappeared. Mercer caught himself on the table edge. He felt his bandage tear again at the knuckle. Pain flashed. He ignored it. He fed another packet because the trail could not stop. Not now. Not with fighters relearning the screen. At unu chasse. The navigator called the turn for home. The Lancaster began to withdraw. The flak thinned behind them. The stream stretched again as aircraft found their own paths out of the corridor. Mercer listened for the rear gunner's next call. None came. Instead, at 1:30, a message came through on a guarded channel. Brief and cold. A fragment from another crew's transmission. Picked up and relayed later. Window ineffective. A voice said, fighter still vectored. Screens not blind. It was not fully true. It was not fully false. It was the enemy learning, and the crews feeling fear return. Mercer stared at the maintenance logbook and realized the legacy would not be simple. Window was not a magic curtain. It was a tool that forced the enemy to spend time, fuel, and attention. It shifted the numbers. It did not remove danger. That was the payoff of the paradox. A childish bundle of strips did what tons of bombs could not. It made defenses stop seeing clearly. But the enemy did not need perfect sight. They only needed enough. At 1:20, Owen spoke in a quiet tone Mercer had not heard before. They're adapting, he said. Mercer answered with the only truth that mattered. Then we adapt faster, he said. The Lancaster crossed the coast outbound over water again at 0138. The engines steadied. The fuel smell faded. The bomb bay doors closed with hydraulic pressure still intact. The spring insert remained in place. Unseen now by night. Recorded by day. Back on the ground. Papers would move. The ministry would receive a standardized instruction. Factories would be asked to smooth chute lips. A proper spring insert would be manufactured. The handwritten margins would become typed orders. The first hands would vanish from the record. And in a later file drawer, in a maintenance log that smelled faintly of fuel and blood, the truth would still sit in pencil. Atunuchinchizech, Shidoi. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and immediate. Mercer, he said, after landing, you're coming straight to debrief. Group wants the exact timings, and they want to know who first put that spring in. At 0358 on 27 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer stepped down from the Lancaster onto wet concrete at RAF Skellingthorpe and walked straight toward the debrief hut. Dawn was thin and grey. His knuckle was split again under fresh cloth. The airfield smelled of oil, damp grass, and burnt cordite from turret test fires. He carried the maintenance logbook under his arm like a shield. Inside the debrief hut, the headquarters officer waited at a table with a stopwatch, a stack of forms, and a cigarette he did not light. Wing Commander Harris was there too. Still crisp. Still procedural. Flight Lieutenant Voss sat at the end with his clipboard and eyes that looked older than yesterday. Mr. Talbot stood near the wall. Silent. Leather case closed. Sit, the headquarters officer said. Mercer sat. Exact timings. The officer said, start of window, coast crossing, first fighter contact, bomb release, withdrawal. Mercer answered in numbers. First packet at 2, 3, 4, 6, he said. Coast at 0009. First sighted fighter at 0014. First close approach at 0039. Bombs away at 0101. Turn for home at 0106. Harris wrote without looking up. Voss wrote too. Faster. As if speed could outrun blame. The headquarters officer slid a sheet toward Mercer. It showed a grid of dispatches and losses. Columns of aircraft types and times. Mercer saw the pattern the institution cared about. Not heroism. Not blood. A ratio. This is what they'll ask about. The officer said. Loss rate. Target coverage. Interception rate. Mercer nodded once. Harris finally looked up. His voice was flat. You said a voice reported, window ineffective. He said. Who said it? Mercer kept his tone cautious. A fragment. He said. Not confirmed. Could be fear talking. Could be one station reading the screen better. Talbot spoke for the first time. Records suggest the enemy began adapting within days. He said. Filtering. Wider patrol boxes. Visual hunting when cities glowed. It would not remain a complete blind. Harris nodded. Good. He said, as if the admission made the plan safer. We will not sell it as magic. The headquarters officer leaned forward. No, he said. The other question. He tapped Mercer's logbook with one knuckle. Who first put that spring in? Silence fell. In the silence, Mercer could hear the distant cough of an engine being started somewhere else. Another crew preparing for another night. Voss shifted in his chair. His pencil froze. He wanted a name because names let you file responsibility. He also feared a name because names let you punish. Harris's face did not change. It must be traceable, he said. Hidden things become accidents. Mercer opened the logbook slowly. The pages were smudged with grease. Pencil lines ran down margins. There were dates and tiny notes that sounded ordinary until you remembered what sat behind them. He found Voss's margin entry. Spring tension verified 4 pounds. Fitment approved for operational trial by group. He found his own line. Feed uninterrupted at 205 miles per hour. No jams observed by 0030. He could not find the line that mattered most. The first night, the cut knuckle, the burr in the plywood, the sentence he had chosen not to write, because the truth would not fit in the institution's language. Mercer looked up and chose an answer that protected the fix and buried the man. It began as a crew action, he said, a field expedient, then group trial, now it's standardization. Harris's eyes narrowed. That is not a name, he said. Mercer held his gaze for a second, not defiant, measured. If you want a name, Mercer said, you will stop the next crew from doing the next fix. The headquarters officer exhaled once. It sounded like anger being swallowed. Voss seized the opening. No single man, he said quickly. It was a squadron-level adjustment in response to irregularities, logged as of group trial. Harris looked at Talbot. Talbot did not contradict. Talbot understood the economics of survival. If you hunted for a first hand, you created fear. Fear made crews hide things. Hidden things became failures. Harris wrote a sentence in his notebook. It was not praise. It was a compromise. Origin uncertain, he wrote. Field identified. Group standardized. Mercer felt something cold settle in his chest. The fix was now real enough to be manufactured. The man behind it was now officially unimportant. The headquarters officer slid another paper across the table. It was a typed instruction draft, already written in the clean language of authority. Window dispensing procedure. It read, begin at prescribed time, maintain feed rate, report jams, shoot insert to be inspected. No mention of wire, no mention of tape, no mention of blood. Harris pointed at the draft. This goes to the ministry, he said, then to manufacturers, then to every station that will fly. Mercer nodded again, because nodding was what kept the machine moving. Outside the hut, crews were walking past with helmets in hand. Face pale, eyes fixed forward. The war did not pause while papers were typed. The headquarters officer's tone softened by half a degree, just enough to be human. You did your job, he said to Mercer. You kept the feed going. You gave us numbers. Mercer almost laughed. Almost. His job had been to keep men alive. The institution had turned it into a procedure. Harris stood. One more thing, he said. He opened Talbot's leather case and pulled out a small, manufactured-looking spring sample. Cleaner than Mercer's bent wire, it had a part number stamped into it. This is what it becomes, Harris said. A proper insert. Factory made. Within specifications. Within specifications, the phrase returned. Now wearing a new uniform. Harris closed the case. We will announce window as a tactic, he said. We will not announce the spring. We will not announce the first hands. It creates the wrong incentives. Mercer understood the quiet legacy forming. Official adoption without credit. Later rediscovery via records. He looked down at his logbook and realized it was the only place the truth still lived. Even without a confession line. The headquarters officer pointed toward the door. Get some sleep, he said, and keep that book. Don't let it disappear. Mercer stood and tucked the logbook under his arm tighter. At patru, șapte sprezece. He stepped outside into dawn and heard the next day beginning. Lorries moving, tools clinking, engines coughing. He walked toward the dispersal pens, not to rest, but because another crew was already waiting by a Lancaster, holding window packets with nervous hands, looking for the one man who knew the feel of 4 pounds of tension. They saw Mercer and called out a single sentence that made the paradox complete. Is it within spec now? One of them asked. Or is it still just tinfoil and luck? At 0502 on 27 July 1943, Flying Officer Alan Mercer stood beside the Lancaster's open bomb bay and pressed 2 fingers against the chute mouth. He did not need a scale. He knew the feel. About 4 pounds. Enough to guide paper at 205 miles an hour. enough to keep a corridor of sky filled with metal lies. A young sergeant from another crew waited with a packet in his hands, eyes wide from lack of sleep. Owen stood nearby, silent, thumbs still wrapped. Flight Lieutenant Voss watched from a distance with his clipboard, already half-turned toward the next form. Mr. Talbot's leather case rested on a crate like a toolbox that belonged to nobody. The sergeant had asked the question that mattered. "Is it within spec now?" he had said. "Or is it still just tinfoil and luck?" Mercer answered without romance. "It works," he said. "If you feed early, if you keep the rhythm, if you don't stop when flak starts." He took the packet, pushed it into the chute, and let it drop as a demonstration. Clean release. No snag. "Begin your first drop at the prescribed time," Mercer said. "Count your seconds. Don't guess." The sergeant nodded like a man receiving doctrine. Across the airfield, more Lancasters were being serviced. More chutes were being checked. The spring insert was spreading. No longer hidden, but still not celebrated. It was becoming part of a system. By the first week of August, the paperwork had caught up. Group instructions circulated with typed headings and stamped initials. The words were careful. Standardize feed. Inspect insert. Report irregularities. The language removed blood from the story. It also made the fix repeatable. Factories were asked to produce proper inserts. Chute lips were smoothed. Burrs were removed. Packet angles were corrected. The field wire that Mercer had bent in a vise became a part number in a catalogue. Within specifications. At last. Germany continued to adapt. Night fighters shifted tactics. Radar operators learned to read clutter and search for edges. Controllers widened patrol zones. Intercept still happened. Losses still came. Window did not end the night war. It changed the arithmetic. Numbers moved the way men could feel but rarely say out loud. It forced fighters to spend more fuel searching. It forced controllers to accept uncertainty. It bought minutes for bomber streams to pass. It made some interceptions late and some misses permanent. Unit reports noted confusion. After-action summaries described degraded plots and uncertain contacts. The enemy stopped laughing because the laughter required certainty. The irony stayed. A childish bundle of strips did what thousands of tons of bombs could not. It made defenses stop seeing clearly. But clarity was not required to kill, only enough. Mercer kept flying through July into August. He fed window in turbulence and flak. He cleared one jam at 2358 on a later night, tearing a wrapper and cutting his fingertip on foil. He wrote it down. One jam. Cleared in 10 seconds. He learned to make the logbook boring. Because boring meant repeatable. Flight Lieutenant Voss stayed in the system. He signed forms. He forwarded directives. He never wrote Mercer's name next to the origin. He did not need to. The institution had what it wanted. Procedure without a person. Mr. Talbot returned to his office and wrote memoranda that would be filed under technical headings. Not human ones. Feed irregularities corrected by insert. Recommended redesign. He would be cited later, if anyone looked, as engineering notes, not as a witness to a knuckle bleeding in a bomb bay. Owen kept fixing aircraft until his hands shook from fatigue and cold. He never told anyone about the file slip at 0612 or the blood on primer. He did not want the story. He wanted the next aircraft to leave the ground. Years later, the war ended and the airfields emptied. Aircraft were scrapped. Tool chests were sold. Paperwork moved to archives. The war's noise faded into drawers. In a records office, a clerk filed a stack of maintenance logs under a unit code and a date range. July 1943. Bomber Command. Operation Gomorrah period. The clerk did not know what window felt like in the hand. The clerk did not know what 4 pounds meant. The logbook Mercer had carried was one of those. Its pages smelled faintly of fuel and damp cloth. The pencil entries were still there. Chute mouth tightened. Vibration reduced. Hydraulic pressure lost over target. Spring tension verified 4 pounds. Feed uninterrupted at 205 miles per hour. No line ever said, Mercer did this first. No line ever said, Owen cut his thumb. No line ever said, we lied to survive. But the truth lived between the lines, in the sequence and the timing, in the way the handwriting changed after the first Hamburg night. A later reader, perhaps a historian with a magnifying glass and patience, could trace it, the first appearance of spring tension, the shift from pencil cover language to typed standardization, the moment the institution absorbed a field expedient and erased the hand that made it. That was the legacy, official adoption without credit, later rediscovery via records. And the paradox stayed intact. A cheap strip of aluminum did not win a war by itself. It did not protect every crew. It did not stop firelight fighters from hunting. But it forced a defense built on precision to live with uncertainty. Night after night, raid after raid. In July 1943, over Hamburg, uncertainty was enough to change the scale of the night. Mercer never received a medal for a wire spring. He never heard his name attached to window in any speech. He went back to his bunk that morning and slept for 2 hours, then woke to the sound of engines starting again. On a later day, long after the raids and the flames, someone opened that file drawer and read the small pencil line in the margin. Spring tension verified 4 pounds. They would not know whose knuckle bled. They would only know the system had changed.